So get it out of your system. Awesome. So, for those of you guys, I don't know, so Good People has been it's been a great group to be a part of, both to meet amazing kind of operator, developer partners, and then, the business partners as well within group. It's been a lot of fun to kind of have opportunities to kind of get together, kick around ideas. I think part of the nexus of this conversation was at the last event. Denny and Dan and I were actually got in some pretty deep conversations about nursing and the future of nursing and what really makes sense, how you can really accommodate it and stuff like that. So really talked a lot about that. So what we're trying to do as an organization or as a group is think through some of these topics to say, hey, how can we help each other out? We're all kind of dealing with the same stuff, maybe in different ways, but how can we go in and rethink and redevelop what we're doing for really the betterment of the senior living community, but then also for the staff and for the different operators and developers that we're working with, a little broader. So we're all kind of seeing it from different sides and angles, but then how can we all kind of share our own insights and thoughts and how this comes together from that standpoint. So today, I think for the first inaugural session, we were thinking about repositioning, which is actually a pretty broad topic as far as hitting, whether it be an organization or a single site or an acquisition. What is it when you kind of look at your community that you wish you had, you wish you didn't have, and stuff like that? Because a lot of times you get used to your communities because you're there every day, you're in and out. It's not till it's kind of like when you have friends over and you're about to start a party and you realize all the stuff you wish you would have done prior. What is it that you wish you had before that marketing walk that you said, okay, we have these services, we have these amenities, we have these opportunities, these social interactions, this, web-based platform, whatever those things are, what is it you wish you had? And sometimes it's easier when you do an acquisition on a community because you really do get kind of a chance to start over from that standpoint and then really look at it, without knowing everything, not being used to it. But I think from our standpoint, we've done a lot of repositionings both on the for-profit and the not-for-profit side where it's, there's an opportunity to reposition and add on to the existing community. And in that application, what resident mix do you want to currently kind of increase? What does the market say that you can do if you did a market study? What you just innately feel like would be good to add to the campus? And, different times there's different things. Rehab was the big thing to add because what you can make with the rehab bed was great and you wanted to maximize that. Now that, in the past year that's changed. So now then that's changing. So, the rehab suites that we're doing aren't quite as, gracious as they used to be, but we're kind of following the dollars as well. But now in the past couple of years, the other big thing that's happened is on the staffing side. It used to be that, we really didn't, maybe appreciate's not the best word, but we didn't really do as much for our staff, right? But I think in the past couple of years, we've understood the need to really make them as happy as possible and to keep them in our communities as long as possible. So we're willing to do a lot more things, whether it be on the design side or on the benefit side or whatever, to say, hey, we really do appreciate you guys. One of the neatest stories that I've heard is that in some instances, our communities are actually a safer, better environment for the staff than when they're at home. So they actually, in some ways, enjoy work better than they do at home in some instances. So in that case, it's like, well, wow, that's pretty amazing. So how do we further integrate this environment, integrate them into our, community family from that standpoint? So I think there's a lot of broad stuff that we're doing from that standpoint. From a process on repositioning, I guess maybe, Denny and Dan, do you want to talk about maybe as a start, when it is that you guys think you want to position a community, maybe how often you look at position communities, is it every, 7 to 10 years? Like we kind of like to do updates on communities, generally, what is your mindset as an organization?
Well, I'll start and I'll pass it over to Denny. First, Dennis and I were just trying to figure out who Tess was staring at. Was it me or was it Denny? And we're not sure, but
it was me.
Both of you at the same time.
And then,
that's why your eyes were doing that.
Yeah, we thought maybe you started partying early today, so that's good to know. And then we also just wanted to comment. I don't know where Angus is, but if you ever see, it's like, where's Waldo? Here's Angus. He's in the Bahamas. Where's Angus? He's at some awards dinner. Where's Angus? He's fishing. He and Kane need to work more That's just my opinion, but, so, as far as, thanks for having us, and I'm gonna pass it on to Denny in a second, but, for us, repositioning, we try to be deliberate. But, the way the markets have been over the last 20 years, the ups and downs is that, whenever we think we're going to be able to move something forward, something else jumps in. And so, when you talk about repositioning and the decision to actually, renovate or reposition a community, it often happens because something becomes functionally obsolete, but sometimes you have things happening, and Rick D'Amico is working with us in Bel Air. His firm Bel Air is working with us on the building we're in right now is going to have a fairly significant seismic retrofit, which wasn't something we were planning on, with some amenity work being done, but the lion's share of the money is being spent on a retrofit that we weren't planning on doing. So it wasn't so you have the repositionings that just that are natural and that happen because of the age of plan or change in market. And then there's repositionings that occur because something comes up and you realize that maybe there's structural issues or resident fear issues or just things that come up. We recently also, unfortunately, Oakland seems to be our cursed town right now. We recently had a fire in one of our communities, and thankfully no one was seriously hurt, but I mean, the building is likely potentially a total loss. So now that building's going to have to be repositioned as well. Now the question is going to be, what is it going to be repositioned into? So we're going to have to spend some time. Right now, the focus is making sure all the residents are safe and stabilized, and the team members are getting the building locked down and abated as necessary. But so, what happens a lot, and I'll kick it to Denny, but is that you end up having these repositionings that are kind of thrust upon you. And then Dennis can talk about the one we're doing down in Viverdi, which is one we've been planning on for a long time. So Dennis?
Yeah, and just to go a little bit further into Piedmont, or where we're at now, this building, we've looked at it from different perspectives, but even within how we're going to position the building as a whole, we're gonna shift skilled nursing as well here, our post-acute care. As I'm real quick, who operates the post-acute care on this call? Just a quick show of hands, have a sense. Okay, some of you. This market specifically has changed dramatically, as many markets has, we've all seen. But one thing we realize, and I'm sure you have too, each market's very unique on the shift. On the shift as it relates to either private pay or from Medicare to managed care. And this is one where we see opportunity as we're investing in the building to downsize skilled nursing, not to exit, but to downsize, invest, move to more private rooms. So therefore we can look at higher reimbursements for fewer products, actually drive more revenue in this building than we're driving today with that shift in market. Dan mentioned Santa Barbara. We're having conversations. Santa Barbara's been an ongoing story for 10 years. And one of the reasons is we've gotten close to decisions, and there's been these shifts in the market that we've all seen, from, again, either reimbursement or to private pay simply eroding. Maybe many of you have seen that, especially in an older building. Santa Barbara is an older building. It was 1965, 1978, and 1987. It was built in 3 increments. So just kind of think about that for a minute, what it's like to operate a building that's older than a lot of us on this call. Maybe not, I don't want to pick it. I can say other than Greg, maybe, but I don't want to do that to anybody.
I was 2, okay?
So
he's younger than us. Be careful.
I know, that's why I picked on him. But looking at that market and how it's evolved, so that 10-year conversation, a lot of things have happened. Think about costs in 2012-13, we were initially planning on building 3 new buildings. And the cost and the market, our market search studies back then, where we could easily serve 60 to 72, build 3 new buildings, it's going to be $20 million. Well, that conversation 10 years later, almost, or 8 years later, actually, it's $60 million. Oh, and by the way, you only need about 40 beds. So it's drilling in and looking at it from that context to what's the demand in that market? And we spent a lot of time looking at that. Who are the residents we want to serve? And if we're going to go all in this context, Do we want to own the market? And it's asking all those questions and working with Greg and some others to try to answer them to what's the best solution. Again, a 10-year conversation, but there's been a lot of changes in direction over the last 10 years.
Yep. And how does that, as you look at the buildings that you're trying to update, so, you're kind of looking deeply into what you want to do. And as you start to identify that, what dominoes are going to fall, kind of like you talked about the seismic thing that happened there. So sometimes it is, okay, if you're in an area that's really hard to develop in, what is the time lag on that versus a renovation, from that standpoint? What things do you have that might not be in full compliance with the regulations if it is a licensed building? And then in some instances, if you do have a community, do you want to add something that is very staff heavy? Or if you have an opportunity, do you want to add something that is very efficient on the staffing perspective, which then can also placate or work more towards a middle market product? So we're doing a lot of stuff right now where it's how can you add an active adult to a community, or how do you do an IL that's unbundled? So how do you properly size the kitchen and the dining services to provide for the building? But if you have right now we have one community, believe it or not, that's 265 residents on active adult. Now, how do you size that kitchen and that dining opportunity? Because you really don't know. So right now it's about a third, and it's also at a lower time frame because you don't want to have to take care of 3 meals a day. So if you're looking at your staffing ratios, how do you do it where breakfast is like 9 to 1. And then when you start your prep work, how long your shifts last and stuff like that. So, really thinking through the structure. So I think an underlining thing to consider as you're doing repositioning is it might be with your current staffing in your community right now, where is the gravy? Where do you have more staff than you really need? But it's because of the ratios that you have. So many times we're looking at a building and we're identifying the performer with the actual design, and we could add 3 more rooms, say, for the exact same staffing. So then it's a huge upside on it. But when you look at that, sometimes it's not the day shift where the gravy is, it's actually the night shift. And not everybody really thinks about the night shift while they're kind of putting together the design or the performa. So, you want to really think pretty deeply into what you're doing and why. And if you're doing a repositioning on a community, where do you already have the staff and where could you really maximize the efficiency and the income based on the staffing that you have?
Well, and that's why I think it's important to, I was just waiting. Dennis was taking a breath to say something, so I jumped in. But that's why it's also important to be parts of groups like this, because a group like this gives you access to other experts and who see things a little bit differently. We were going down, and Dennis mentioned earlier, we were going down a totally different path. And but knowing Greg the last couple of years and bringing him into this conversation, it's sometimes we end up with blinds, and same thing happened. Rick's been really involved with us in this project here, the seismic project. We were, we kind of had these blinders on and we were going down a certain path, and then different hands got raised about, hey, what about this? Is this possible? And we're literally spending about half here of what we initially thought we were going to spend, and we couldn't spend that much. Still spending a ton, but we're spending a ton minus a bit. And the same thing happened with Santa Barbara with Greg. And so, I give Greg a hard time, but he really helped us see it differently. And so when you're looking from, if you're looking at, when you're adding a partner, you need to make sure also that when you bring, whether it's an architect or whether it's a development consultant or a project manager or someone in dining, they have to understand what it is we do, or they have to have access to people who know what it is that we do, because I think that that's where you run into trouble. And so, like I said, we brought in initially an engineer who's a good engineering firm, but was looking at it differently, and almost became an adversarial relationship when we were all working together. And in the project that Greg's helping us with right now, it's kind of the same thing. We were looking at there was one way, we're going to go this way in this direction only. And he's like, well, you really don't need to do that, which got my antenna up. And now we're going to end up doing a project, I think, that is going to meet everybody's needs and desires, but it's different than what we started at. And it's probably about less than half the price, so it really is. So kudos to you guys. But so my advice is always, if you have a dining question, even if you don't use Angus, call him. he'll direct you to the right person. And, you know, if you don't know Rick well, he's a great guy to work with. He's become a good friend of our organization and a good friend of mine, but they'll help you. And same thing with Greg. You know, Greg, you know, he was just helping us, you know, whether or not they were going to get to work was different, but he just said, look, let me help you guys through this decision, this conversation. We're in a totally different place than we were 6 months ago, just totally different. And I'm glad, because it's a much more fiscally responsible way for us to be acting. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, no, it's fresh eyes. And one of the things that Greg, you were talking about in repositioning was looking at staffing, looking at the market, looking at the different shifts. We have a building where we're doing just the opposite, where we are, and this is going to be more specific to skilled nursing still, but we're actually moving away from, this is unusual for our organization, we're going to move away from Medicare and managed care. The market is in, and we're going to go straight Medi-Cal or Medicaid for those of you outside of California, which has been counterintuitive to everything we do. And the reason is, in that particular market, the reimbursement rates are so low that by shifting to Medi-Cal, we're actually getting a better reimbursement, and we can start to look, and we're staffing differently. You staff differently, you pull out rehab, and a campus that's been struggling, we are expecting to actually improve the overall operating margin now by pivoting that business, being very strategic and focused, and changing the whole model with little investment. So it's not always chasing the higher dollar, but it's stepping back and going, what is right for that market? And in that particular building, we're excited about 2023. That shift really increased the operating margin, but it took those kinds of eyes to look at it just differently. And then, you know, counterintuitively, increasing the revenue, reducing expenses. So both sides of the equation are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, that's great. And I think one thing to think about, and I think we've actually come in several times after other architects, because, you know, sometimes you can think more about that big project you want, maybe as a designer or an architect, as opposed to what seems right for the community itself. We have this kind of fun thing that we say in houses, let's ask the building what it wants to be, and then kind of work off of that instead of trying so hard to, you know, change everything, because by the time you're finished, it's almost cheaper to do a new building in some instances. So if you can really work more with the existing structure of what's there, I think that makes a lot of difference. If you are, the other thing we've done a lot of is, if you are repositioning campus, you're trying to figure out where to put things, try to put the new building at the front, because it does put a really nice face on the community as a whole. So if you can do that and then have a nice transition into, say, the older buildings where you don't even know you're in an older building until you walk outside and look up, you know, how can you do it so that you work that way? So, so let's step back maybe for a second to the process. So I know what we like to do is do a fairly deep dive as we kick off a project to really talk about what is the mission of the organization, what is the purpose of what they want to do, you know, what is it that wellness means to the community? Because right now, that is one of the biggest topics right now. And there's a big misunderstanding or a lot of different answers to what wellness is. So we actually spent a lot of time initially talking about what wellness is to the organization, what they're currently actually doing, what they wish they were doing, what they're telling people they're doing, and really in the end, what they really want to do. And there's so many opportunities within that, especially so now that wellness is so much more social in its context and what you do. What can you do to really reinforce it and do that in a way that allows you to encourage that in a very positive way from that standpoint? So, you know, it's really good to look at your existing community and look at your organization and what you want to do and what is it you can do to that building to reinforce that, you know, that for that from that standpoint. And then what is your mix that you have and what would be the optimum mix and what you can what can you actually do with it? And a lot of times when you think through it, and sometimes this is helpful when people, because you have some people that say are really cheap in the way that they think about some things and then might kind of overthink things on the other side. So sometimes it's interesting to look at it to do a low, medium, high solution to some things. And 9 times out of 10, you'll end up at the medium or some derivation one way or the other. But that way you're not focusing on something that might be too expensive or one person in the group thinks might not be good enough. Because by the time you look at it and you talk about how that might help the fill up are the future marketing opportunities, and you actually back in that cost to say getting 10 more residents at this date as opposed to the other, it can help with the decision-making process from that standpoint. So really, to have a charrette with your team to really talk through the community, walk through it, and start thinking of really big picture. And sometimes it could just be pictures or what do you want people to say about your organization? You know, what is it that would make the residents and the staff happy that they're a part of this group there is really good. A lot of buildings require a pretty deep dive on some kind of a facility analysis to see what is it that the building itself has as opportunities, and what in older buildings might be more of a challenge to work with. And in that case, it could be that the building might lean to another occupancy type or another thought than it might otherwise, because, you know, if you can go more to an IL or say an active adult scenario, it gives you an opportunity to be a little bit more flexible in what you're doing, which is a lot of fun from that standpoint. So Rick, I think we had a lot of fun at the Presbyterian Village North campus that we did there, which is a bit of this, but we actually had to tear down a multifamily building, several cottages. So there was a lot of the nuances that we had to do to maintain the resident satisfaction, because a lot of times when you're doing a large repositioning, half of it is selling the residents, especially on a not-for-profit, you know, who they, you know, a lot of ownership for them. What would you say about that process and how that all came together?
Well, first and foremost, don't be afraid to talk to your residents, ask them what's working, what's not working. You know, there's simple ways to do that. End of year, oftentimes an organization will ask for resident satisfaction. If you're willing to share that, like HumanGood was, they were willing to share that with us when we did a community assessment survey. We read all of those and found some interesting things, some redundant opportunities. We said, you know, let's put this on the list. First and foremost, what is the market telling us? Because when we design, we not only or recommend a repositioning, we're not only doing it for the existing residents, but for their adult children, the people behind them. One, we've heard the existing residents are your champions, but two, so are the adult children that help them make decisions and continue the conversation at the dinner table when the potential resident or resident is sharing what life is like with them. I want to speak to HumanGood for just a second. In 2017, they engaged our group to do a community assessment survey. And what Greg was speaking about a moment ago about facility assessments, we take a little different approach in that it's a developer's perception in terms of where's the low-hanging fruit, what could improve your CapEx, what is a project that doesn't require refinancing. So in some instances, your operator has money set aside. Are we spending it the right way? And we can advise them on maybe where those dollars are a little better spent in this lane versus another. And then the third silo would be, you know, new development opportunities. So we appreciate that HumanGood asked us to do that for 16 of their 18 communities. In that, we found lots of opportunities, and some of them are simple. Some are as simple as adjacencies. There was a project in Des Moines, Washington, and we found over time that, you know, the initial uses, someone like Greg in their programming, they had a hallway that did A, B, and C as you went down that hallway. But over time, it had been split up, it had been carved out, it had lots of new uses. So, you know, sometimes going back to that, it's just as simple to do that. Or as he said, you know, look at those adjacent land opportunities. Maybe it's a long-term strategic plan where you're purchasing some additional property and you can grow on that. Placement of your services. One question we ask an operator, is this inward facing or outward facing? There's a project, again, that HumanGood has in one market. They have a corner lot, which can serve the residents of that community very well, but they've decided maybe there's some retail opportunities there that create a gateway, an opportunity to say, you know, services or retail that supports 55 plus, you know, right behind it is the campus and all that we do. So that adjacency again becomes very important. Lastly, Greg, you talked about wellness. There are lots of different ideas and tenets about that. Start your wellness program today. Talk to your staff and, you know, maybe there's incentives for them to start a weight loss program, to eat better. You know, if you can incentivize them, talk to your insurance company and see what that might mean to them. In one community, one day, on a Monday, they were all wearing orange shirts. And everybody asked, all the residents and people coming in, what's new, what's different? Well, we're starting a wellness program today. Greg, it was that community you mentioned, Presbyterian Village North in Dallas. We did a major overhaul, of $5 million standalone wellness center that was underwritten by the foundation at that campus. They operated $30 million, had to spend 10% of it. And one of the stories we told at the very beginning is that, what your team can do for you, they can do better in this new environment. So going back to your team members and going back to your residents, what do you want? I was standing up front as a member of the leadership team, and we asked and we asked and we asked. And one day a light bulb went off, and it was like, who needs to be up here telling the story about change? It's Shannon and it's Steve, the two people that work with the residents every day. They said to the residents, if I have this new environment, instead of working with rubber bands or this, that, and the other, we can do so much more. The foundation called us in a week later, wrote a check. So, it's that communication, finding your champions, meaningful programs, purpose, and all of that. Greg, I took a short time answering a long question, but I think I touched on a few things that I think are relevant, and I hope help the continuation.
That's important. And the wellness project was purposely pushed to the front of the campus, right next to the entry, because we wanted to say wellness is important, and it intertwined a clinic, a spa, a huge pool, indoor pool, a special little kind of satellite physical therapy suite, huge gym, a couple of group exercise rooms, but then it had a Healthy Options Cafe adjacent to it that kind of connected everything. And then the new independent living building connected right to that. So that was your entry into it from that standpoint. So the goal was to kind of innately put it in a place that you had a lot of energy, a lot of synergy, and it really had a lot of, impact on the community.
For all of you, not only was it, you mentioned the aquatic center, we enlarged the aquatic center, and adjacent to the pool, you have your side activities to the pool, or where someone might sit while another person's swimming. We tripled it in size so they can have events. We found that a lot of people moving from their homes in Texas with pools, they like to have outdoor events. They like to have poolside events. So in our enclosed area, we had a little gazebo type structure and a hot tub and an outside bar. It was all part of wellness in that, socialization was so important. The residents could use it. They're all adults enjoying their space, and had a great time. But to Greg's point, we did move it to the front door. They were a faith-based organization. They had a chapel on one side, wellness on the other. And it really made a subtle statement, but a strong one. This is what's important to us in that front door experience.
Really
Well,
did.
I think it's and it's important. I think that Rick, you mentioned it earlier, is that as you're doing these repositionings, they take a really long time. And so you need to be looking at who your market currently is, but who your market's going to be in. Dennis and I were walking through a community in Chicago suburbs recently, and looking at their aquatic center. And then Dennis went into he wanted to check out the locker room, but he got locked in. So you've also got to make sure that, when you're working with Greg or Rick, that they figure out to make sure that things are truly idiot proof, because this guy couldn't get out of the bathroom. Now, my suggestion was to leave him in there, but the people that were giving us the tour decided to let him out. But I think it's important, Dennis spends a lot of time, in all seriousness, with the active aging group. He just came back from that conference in Florida. And it is, we're seeing, the next generation of residents are much more health conscious, and they want, a lot of the wellness centers and pools and aquatic centers that were built in the past were really marketing tools. People came and go, wow, look at this gym, but they never used it, and now people, they do use it. And so you've got to think about what people want in the future when it comes to dining. We're doing a big dining remodel down in our La Jolla community, and we're gonna have a really cool pizza oven and things like that. But we're realizing what the adult children, as Rick said, what they would want as well, because these projects, the project we're doing in Santa Barbara, it's for the current residents, but it's really more going to be for the next gen of residents. And we understand that the next gen of residents, and Dennis has been pushing this hard, they're not going to share rooms. They want a private room when they're in skilled nursing or rehabilitation. They're not looking for a roommate. You need to have private baths, and you need to have showers in the bathrooms. People don't want to be pushed down the hallway in a wheelchair, wrapped in a shower blanket, or bath blanket. And then it's a dignity issue. And, you know, and I know a lot of you are involved in whether you're involved directly in operations or, you know, but you're all working in this industry. And so much of the work that we do, we need to really focus on dignity, residents' dignity, and making people feel safe and comfortable. And, you know, those are the designs that we have to be looking at. And we have to be thinking about, you know, what do people want going forward? You know, what are the activities people are interested in? What are the kind of exercise? What are the kind of foods? And Angus' team's always pushing, you know, concepts, good concepts on us that demonstrate what the next gen of people are going to eat. You know, 15 years ago, you rarely see a kale salad on a menu anywhere, you know, but you go pretty much anywhere to eat now, there is some form of a kale salad. Now, I don't like kale, but others do, but people find it important and they eat it. And so we just need to be focused on not just understanding today. And that's why this group, and Kane's done a nice job of bringing together a group of people who, a lot of us have a lot of experience and some are newer to the industry, but to really understand, because I think that's the biggest, the 27 years I've been in this industry, that's been the biggest challenge, is that a lack of understanding. You know, people have a picture in their mind of what their grandma's nursing home was like, and that's what they think they're all like. Those places are not sustainable anymore. They're just so far behind. And so we have to look at those designs. Those designs have to last, like this design that we're doing in Santa Barbara with Greg, this has to go 20 years. So we need to think 20 years in the future, what people are going to want.
Yep. And not just that, but I mean, I would challenge all of us to say, are we doing stuff we would not want to be in, right? How many times do you see a building, like you just feel sorry for the residents because it's just not the ideal situation. So in a weird way, I don't know that any of us should be doing buildings that we wouldn't ourselves be willing to live in now or in the future when we're in that situation. So I think that's a big thing to ask. And it is surprising when they do studies and they talk to their folks, how many folks in this industry would not actually be willing to stay in their own buildings from one of that standpoint. Go ahead, Dan.
Kane, and I thought this was a little bit more of an exclusive group. We see Travis Staples. You let Travis Staples in this group?
I did when he joined today. Hey, Travis, thanks for joining. When he joined, I was like, these guys go way back. I forgot that you guys went back together.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. You know, I hear, you know, Kane's hanging out with all kinds of riffraff there, Dan. I saw you and Dennis and thought Kane's clearly going downhill.
Well, and I would tell you, Travis is a good man. We used to, Dennis, Travis, and I worked together for a long time, but we have an executive director in our Yakima community. His name is Travis. And about, I don't know how long ago, 4 or 5 months ago, I was calling him, but you know, he's on West Coast time. So I called him, it was like, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night. I get this, hello. And I got my Travis's mixed up. And so it's the first time I talked to Travis Staples in a while, but he was very, very kind to me, much kinder to me than I would have been to him if he called me and woke me up. So good to hear you, Travis.
Thanks, Dan. Good to see you.
So as I think to kind of wrap up or talk through some of the stuff we're talking about, even though when you're repositioning, think of what you want in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, really plan for the future, because you'd be surprised how many times we go to a community and the best opportunity as a building that is not a great building, not very dense, didn't really hit it, but it's right in the place where we really want to do something. And it really impacts the future work. So think through as you're doing the repositioning as a whole, as you start stair stepping, how are you going to kind of work through the different projects to bring it all together in a way that makes sense? I know that on the PVN projects, one of the goals there was it was an older campus. It really didn't have a focus in how it was, and it really didn't have a center point for everybody to gather. On that campus, what we did is actually demolish some of the core stuff and actually create a great big pond that interconnected everything. And it gave us an opportunity for outdoor environments, which for us, that's one of the bigger things that we're doing right now is how do you let your building flow outside more? I think that everybody has a greater expectation of their environment on the outside than they used to. I think everybody wants to spend more time outside since they weren't able to. Kind of going back to dining for a second, you know, that's everything right now. So our goal is to try to figure out a way to provide whatever range of dining services that folks want in a very cost-effective way, because when a building, I don't think, thinks through the food production process as well as the serving process well, I think those are the ones that don't do as well financially. Angus, what are you finding on your side of things that has become a focus or a way people are shifting to, better take advantage of their communities or the options that residents want?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking, and thank you, Dan, for the kind words throughout your time today. That's very unlike you. I appreciate it. In all seriousness.
Reverse, thank you.
No, I appreciate the partnership and love having this group together. I think a couple of things. I mean, what I'm hearing, through Rick's comments and Greg, obviously your experience with Dan and Denny in this particular instance is the important partnerships. And, to Dan's earlier point, you might not be a current Compass Community Living partner, but reach out to Greg and reach out to Rick. Rick, I just connected with you on LinkedIn. Build the network, because together we have to really make sure that we're being intelligent and we're tapping into the collective intelligence as we're making these monumental changes and decisions. So I think one of the things that I'm seeing, and I've been seeing this for years, it goes all the way back to, the work that I did with HumanGood in 2017 and 18 and other partners going forward. It's really making sure that the right people are at the table, and that as decisions are being made, you're sort of pressure checking along the way. So we're seeing more and more organizations look to us, for resources and support that go well beyond food on the plate and well beyond keeping spaces and environments clean. It's about the strategic use of dollars. It's about tapping into the broader group's resources and finding a way to make the best decisions possible. In terms of like specific trends and what I'm seeing, where I'm seeing rubber meeting the road, I think Dan's project is probably at the forefront of that, really just utilizing existing spaces to create something that will not only present the current resident group with delightful experiences and what they're looking for, but attract new residents down the road. So walking that line right around, okay, what do the residents of today want? But Greg, to your point, what do future residents want? What do we want? And that boils down to my final point, and that's just the use of data. Really figuring out what the trends are in the specific market space, and then more globally across the country and throughout the region, and trying to bring those data points to life through the execution of the redevelopment of the space. So that's me in a nutshell in terms of what I'm seeing. And if anybody has any further questions, you can always reach out to me, like Dan said.
Exactly. And we're really trying to do a lot more flexibility in the dining options we have currently. How do you, adjust things so that you feel like you have a different dining venue? Because for some of these residents, to go to the same place every day, every meal can be a bit of a challenge. So how do you do it so you can switch it off? How do you actually flow into maybe an adjacent space every once in a while, do something different? We're doing a lot more kind of indoor outdoor rooms, which creates a really neat environment for people, especially with, the craziness we're having when it can be cold or hot or whatever. In so many communities, residents really want to be outside. They still want to get the vitamin D. They still want to be a part of it. But how can you do it so it's a little bit more of a controlled environment? And then how do you do it where that environment could be a little bit more central and a bunch of spaces can kind of lead into it? Because a lot of times when people would do something like this, they just kind of plug it in at the end or not really think about the connectivity of it. So if you do want to do something like that, how do you really maximize the usability of that space? Outdoor dining is huge in what we're doing right now. And even if it's just informal and just, even for the staff to be able to go outside. Mr. Arruda, what are you finding? You have quite a few communities that you're working with. What are you seeing, sir?
Right. So we're in the process of recapitalizing two SNF AL memory care buildings here in suburban Boston, built effectively year 2000, 197, 2002. So roughly 2000 vintage. They look, feel, smell 2000 vintage, Holly Hobby wallpaper, strawberry shortcake carpeting. You guys know what I'm talking about. So we're repositioning these buildings and we're trying to make them the best Bs they can. So what we're doing is we're closing the SNF because we're getting out of long-term care. We're going to convert that to independent living. And so when we're talking about amenities, you know, outdoor dining is absolutely something that we're doing on one of them. We're actually going to put a bistro. And one of the things that we're doing differently with our properties, and it's really varies state to state, but here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we're actually taking we're securing liquor licenses. So full liquor licenses open to the public, which for Massachusetts is like unheard of for the property owner as an institutional sponsor to hold. And so our bistro that we'll create on the first floor, where our IL will be located on the second floor, is going to be primarily an amenity for the IL, so that we're trying to integrate the public into the IL setting. So it's almost more like a hotel, right? Where you've got a condo hotel, folks live there, but you've also got visitors. And so that's really the direction we're going with our amenity program. So we'll do that with the gym. We open the fitness classes up to the market. We're really targeting that 55 plus demographic, but we put a real, you know, kick-ass gym into the building. We more so than you're going to see at a fitness center, generally in a seniors building. You know, we do a yoga studio, we have balance bars, we do things like that. We also do a hydroponics program, and so we'll create some space for hydroponics. No, I know it's Massachusetts, we're not growing cannabis inside the hydroponic garden. Okay.
Sure.
Not yet, at least. Let's see what NOI looks like next year.
Exactly.
So those are things we're trying to do that are out of the box. One of the other things that we do is, although we can't fit a swimming pool on these sites that we're working with, because many of our buildings do have in-ground pools, we're actually putting cold plunge pools in the building, and, you know, tubs. And it's incredible when you watch an 88-year-old gal step into a cold plunge pool for the first time, like anyone, right? It's shocking, but the way it exhilarates them and the energy that they have a minute after they get out of the tub, it's an incredible experience. And once one or two of them do it, they all want to do it. So it's just little things like that. We're trying to, you know, as I thought I heard Dennis's partner say earlier, these are functionally obsolete buildings. So we're doing everything we can to repurpose and reposition them. But you know, we have the right basis to do it.
That's awesome.
Oh,
Hey, Dennis's partner, you guys.
such a child, Greg. All right, well,
We were laughing. Okay, go ahead, Dan.
why don't we have Asher give us a synopsis of what we went through today?
Oh, that'd be great.
Asher, will you just give us a
Impact,
synopsis of what we went through
My
today?
wonderful friends from HumanGood Mothership. This is Asher Odishu in Las Vegas. Good to see everybody. Unfortunately, because I had other commitments, I had to join late, so I'll have to mail that one in. But thanks for the offer, Dan. Good to see you, and Dennis.
Good. Well,
My partner, Dennis, and I,
All right.
thank you.
Asher, thank you for joining. Thanks. Great to see you.
Hey, and Christopher, thank you for sharing all that. You just kicked off a couple other ideas, and Greg, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but you know, something else that I'm seeing in pretty much any discussion I'm having with a potential partner around redevelopment and or new development is really related to workforce and building and creating spaces from not just a dining perspective, albeit that's our main focus, that are just friendly for associates to move throughout and to work within, and creating spaces that are going to allow for maximum efficiency so that in the workforce environment of today and tomorrow, because these challenges aren't going to go away, we can attract and retain associates and make their life and their jobs easier. And then another point that popped into my head while Christopher was speaking about the innovation and forward thinking that his group is doing is around, you know, the implementation of technology, everything from robotics, which I still think is, you know, really bleeding edge and hasn't quite, you know, look, it's not, we're not Buck Rogers yet, right? There's not fully automated robotics available yet, but that's evolving, as well as, you know, laborless or low labor environments throughout communities. You know, how can we leverage technology? You see it in other sectors of Compass Group throughout higher education, perhaps, and even in the acute care side of the world, where we're implementing laborless technology to allow.
Some of the stuff you can do, Angus, is who's next to you, for at least from our vantage point, is the GOAT, who's Tessa, and she, you know, Cubigo has really been a great technology, because it's one of those things that, yes, you know, our team members have to help keep it going, but it keeps the residents engaged together. It's been a great product for us, and it really, some of that stuff you can do without having to work that hard. You know, you implement it and then they use it. But and particularly during the pandemic, it was a godsend for us to have a resident engagement platform. And so that kind of technology, I think also, you know, resident to resident technology, and it's also technology that we use you can use it for a lot of different things, access control and work orders and dining, but it's a way to keep the residents fully engaged through technology. And it's not that complex once you have it set up. So those are all the kind of great tools to be able to move things forward.
Yeah, and it really helps empower the residents, because that's really what we want to do with the active adult and the independent living residents, is give them control and power. And I think that the technology actually allows them to do that, whether it's something that just kind of, you know, monitors them from kind of the sky. But I think the more we can give them, that is great, especially on the active adult. Chris and I were just involved with the ULI presentation on active adult, and it's real interesting to hear from different people on what that is. But I think it's really just a reaction to create something that's a little bit more economical, but really to give people more control over what they do and more flexibility. So I think that is going to be part of the resident profile that we see over the next 10, 20 years, 30 years, is that the resident is just going to sit there and say, okay, that's what you have, I'm fine. They're going to say, no, I want this. And how are you going to do that for me? And so as we're thinking through all of these different aspects of our communities, how can we build in a little bit more flexibility? You know, it's hard to do all of it because there are cost implications, but what do you do to kind of be at the forefront of that? How do you anticipate that, provide more flexibility in your community as a whole? I think it's important. So Nick, on your side, sir, what do you see? I know as you're coming in and taking over management of existing buildings, what are you finding to be the biggest challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges that we faced have really started at the staffing level, and getting the existing staff that we take over to kind of match our expectations. Typically what we've noticed, and it's just natural, as you're transitioning out of management of a community, you let things kind of fall by the wayside because it's somebody else's problem. Or the reason that this building is even up for acquisition is because we kept letting things fall by the wayside and ignoring our problems. So that's kind of been our biggest challenge. And then understanding and getting on the same page with our equity or ownership partners, depending on how each deal works, of just what do we actually expect this building to do? And is that a reasonable timeline? I've been saying a lot of conferences recently that we come in and turn garbage into gold. And sometimes we go into these buildings and think that, you know, there's 10 bags of garbage. And as we take 5 of them out, we realize there's 20 more bags that we didn't see in our market study, in the pre-site visit or anything, and realizing that with whoever we're partnered with on it, that we're all going to work through and find a solution to that. Because as much as we want to say that, you know, we put up a new thing of paint, we put in granite countertops, we put in whatever, that isn't going to be all that you have to do to reposition a building or transition it. It takes a lot more. There's a lot of humans involved, and there's a lot of humans that don't work in our buildings that just drive by us, that we have to change their opinion about our building that we're repositioning. And sometimes like the pool or I actually think the cold plunge thing is really cool, honestly. Never heard of that before. But a lot of times that will do it. And sometimes you have to convince the person that had a bad experience that we're not the same person anymore, even if we change the name or change the paint color or whatever.
Yeah, you really want your community to really breathe out. I know a lot of times you drive by a community and you kind of see the portico share and then the door, but you don't see anything behind it. Or you might see a couple of residents out front that might be not be the best people to represent you guys as a community as a whole. So how do you make this really look like a really cool, badass mixed use community? What is it you can do to say, my gosh, I could see myself living in that community? How do you turn on the lights at night to let everybody kind of see into your community as a whole? I know one of the things that's been helpful with several of our clients is a lot of people may acquire a building, but maybe they don't do a deep dive during the acquisition process. So they might not have really looked into what it could be, maybe priced it accordingly. And then all of a sudden they've made some commitments that may or may not work out. So what we found with several of our clients is that if you'll bring the design team in to look at the building, somebody who's pretty broad in what they can see, to say, hey, we might be able to just take down these 3 walls, do this little thing. Wow, we got some splash here and it's not that expensive. So when you begin looking at acquisition, kind of do a first phase. It is, what can we do real easily, preferably something that's not going to require a permit. So you can show some really quick updates to the building. And that shows the residents in the building, you really are committed to making this building special and different than what it was before. But then it also shows well in the community, especially the new prospective residents. And then you do that first. And then the next step would be any other stuff that you might do that has a permit associated with it. And of course, there's phasing and some other nuances that you need to think through, but really trying to get something, pretty cool and interesting up front, from that standpoint, I think makes a big difference. Because, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, Greg, one of the things that I found, and, I've repositioned a lot of buildings, is, facade has been everything on the repositions that I've done. When we buy buildings and we reposition them, whether they're apartments or seniors buildings, we've gone into buildings, we've spent a ton of money on the inside, making our units more competitive, making our common areas more appealing. And then we didn't really touch the facade. We did, maybe some paint, or we did some new signage. It didn't drive the traffic. And, we had one circumstance where we did this deal. We bought it really well during the GFC. We were 100% below market on our rents, which was like crazy the way we bought it. And, Carlisle bought the deal from us, and we bought it for like 10, we sold it for like 20. They bought it from us for 20, and they did the facade. And they just licensed the wing from Memory Care, and they sold it for $44 million 2 years later. And all the traffic came through the door as soon as they did the facade.
Yeah, that's important. And you can do it. It depends on the building and what it needs. We got a couple of buildings to look at right now that we're adding porches to it. And just think how much that changes the elevation to a fairly flat building, that you add a bunch of porches. And then all of a sudden that's an income producer from what you're providing there. So there's lots of different things that you can do. So Padilla, am I saying that right? Padilla? Probably not by your laugh.
It's Padilla.
Padilla, I'm so sorry. So you had put something up there about staffing as well. Do you want to talk through that for a second?
Yeah, I think that appreciate everybody's time, by the way. I'm getting a glimpse of what perspective and where everybody's thoughts are moving towards. Ultimately, I do believe the market share in skilled is going to be reduced just because of the trend that we see. And that market's going to move into different areas, and hopefully it stays away from home health, and we can generate some greater market share in what you were talking about, Greg. I think that there is going to be a need still for the health cares and servicing the population and looking 10, 20 years down visually, as we want to accommodate the low staffing or the depleted staffing, so to speak, is really designing the healthcare centers for medical purposes so that a single individual has line of sight and could provide that level of care that's needed in order to satisfy. You still have your independent and your assisted. They always want to know what's going on in the health center, right? And what their friends and colleagues and peers are doing over there. And so being able to forward think, leveraging technology is a key word. I know that Angus spoke about that, but I think that has to be part of the discussion, the creativity that exists in order to really set the tone for what that next 5, 10, 20 years that build looks like.
Exactly. We have a couple of folks that are looking more at the small house model. but they're not necessarily looking at it just as a nursing small house model. They're looking at it's assisted living plus, it's a memory care, because it gives a lot of flexibility. So if you stack it vertically, you can actually adjust the license and put a different resident mix in that, or provide more flexibility. And we do have more folks. Unfortunately, there's a lot of brand new communities we're doing that they actually don't have nursing in it. And they're just anticipating that they're going to try to take care of those residents in more of an assisted living plus, integrate some kind of a home health program into it. So it'll be interesting to see how that adjusts the market and if it actually helps the standalone buildings, because there are folks that are looking at trying to amplify that and work more in tandem with the community so that, you know, if you're moving into a CCRC that might not have healthcare, but there really is a building that, you know, will serve it. And that building is not your typical wagon wheel building. It really does have a small house concept or something like that. So there's a lot of ways to combine and a lot of out of the box thinking from that standpoint. Any other comments that we have based on the topic? Any other great ideas that people want to share?
I just have a question. We just recently moved and upgraded our lifestyle from having 3 kids to a bigger house with no kids. But we're trying to equip our own home to stay in it longer. And we're early 50s. So we are that next generation of what we want in our home when I get tired of taking care of this place. But one of the things that is popping up lately, and we're talking a lot about, is saunas. So I'm just curious if saunas are a big deal, and if you're considering, you know, however, I mean, they range from real simple to real elaborate, but I wonder if that would be an idea for folks to think about.
We've looked at a couple of them for different communities. There has been some concern about residents going in there and not being, you know, monitored as much. So I think it really depends on the community as a whole and what the goals are there. But, you know, some areas of the country, you know, Idaho, it's kind of an expectation that you do it. So it really depends on the state and the area.
Gotcha.
From that standpoint. So Denny, you want to take us home?
I'll pass that one to my left.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for putting it together. It was fun. Love to help anybody if they have any other concerns or questions, and look forward to seeing you guys soon. So take care. How about that?
And if you guys have, thank you so much.
Everybody.
Hey, thanks, Greg, and everybody else.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Great job, Greg.
Thank you.
And Danny, thanks
Thank
for
y'all.
seeing everybody.
Hey, bye now.
Everybody.